What if I told you that the death of Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, didn't just mark the end of an era, it set off a chain reaction that changed the world overnight? Imagine societies splitting into competing gods, fierce power struggles, and strange rituals that still boggle the mind. But here's the real kicker. The descendants of Adam, the very first human, are still with us today, quietly influencing the world in ways most people don't even realize. From their ancient bloodlines to their lasting impact on power, culture, and even conflict, their story is still unfolding. After the death of Prophet Adam, the world didn't just continue as it was. It transformed in ways few could have predicted. His descendants spread across the earth, carried with them not only his bloodline but also the divine legacy of the first human. These descendants didn't just fade into the shadows of history. Their impact echoed through the ages, shaping the course of civilizations, cultures, and empires. But how did these bloodlines evolve, and how did their influence spread across continents, continuing to shape our world today? We will discuss these bloodlines in the last chapter. Let's start with one of the most mind-blowing shifts, the explosion of polytheism. After Adam passed away, humans didn't slowly drift away from monotheism. They fractured instantly. Societies, desperately trying to fill the gap left by Adam's unified message, started creating their own gods. Can you imagine? A community near a volcano suddenly believes a fire god controls their fate, while a fishing village nearby begins worshipping a sea deity to calm the waters. This wasn't a long-term philosophical development. It was a desperate, rapid response to a world now devoid of a single divine voice. These gods were born out of fear, confusion, and the need to explain the unpredictable. But here's the kicker. These new beliefs didn't just spread peacefully, they started dividing people. As these pantheons of gods took root, so did conflicts, creating the first cracks in human unity. What if I told you that the first true elites didn't rise from wealth, but from claiming divine lineage? Imagine a tribe claiming to be descended from Adam-favored son, using that ancestral connection as a claim to power. They'd make up elaborate genealogies, enforce rituals, and establish hereditary monarchies. These families weren't just rich, they were divinely chosen. And just like that, power struggles erupted. A battle for resources, control, and religious legitimacy began. This wasn't just about survival. It was about who had the right to rule, based on who could claim the most sacred bloodline. This set the stage for centuries of division and constant battles over who would sit at the top of society. But it wasn't just about the living. After Adam's death, humans began to look at death in a whole new way. Burial practices were no longer about simple disposal of the body. They became rituals designed to appease spirits or even contact the dead. Early civilizations believed the dead were intermediaries between the living and the divine. Can you picture it? Grave goods, human sacrifice, and elaborate tombs became a way to ensure that the deceased could help guide the living. These rituals were not just about remembrance. They were about gaining power over death itself. What started as a desire to honor the deceased, a tool for building family. As families grew more entrenched in these burial customs, they solidified their positions as gatekeepers to the divine. But here's where it gets even stranger. Despite the loss of Adam's divine knowledge, innovation didn't stop. In fact, it exploded, but it wasn't uniform. Imagine one community developing advanced irrigation systems, thriving in prosperity, while another, lacking the same insight, falls into famine and poverty. This wasn't just about survival. It was about regional technological divides. Some groups advanced in agriculture, built early cities, and even created tools that pushed humanity forward. But others, stuck without the wisdom of Adam, regressed. Environmental disasters, lack of knowledge, or internal strife caused their societies to crumble. This caused vast inequalities between regions, with some communities flourishing while others struggled to even survive. And now, let's talk about law and order. After Adam passed, society didn't instantly descend into chaos. Some groups came together and created rudimentary laws to govern their society. But in other places, there was no law at all, just violence, power grabs, and a fight for dominance. The absence of a divine code led to an explosion of different moral systems. Some developed codes of ethics, but others descended into lawlessness. Picture it. One village might have a leader who imposes fairness, but just a few miles away, another group is fighting for every resource and living in constant strife. This chaotic backdrop would continue to influence human history for centuries. And the migrations, they were massive. Communities didn't just stay put. After Adam's death, people were driven to migrate either due to environmental stress, scarcity of resources, or just the ripple effects of conflict. Entire groups moved across continents, encountering new tribes, new beliefs, and new challenges. Some merged, some conflicted, and some even assimilated others. For the first time in history, humans were not just bound to one spot, they were on the move, leading to the mixing of cultures. These migrations would set the stage for the cultural diversity that we now see across the globe, but they also caused chaos and violence. Every move, every shift in location sparked new conflicts, new alliances, and new stories of survival. As more and more groups split from Adam's unified monotheism, religious conflict became inevitable. The idea that one group's gods were superior led to wars, territorial battles, and violent conquests. But it wasn't just about war, it was about identity and what happened next. As communities collided, their religions and cultures began to merge in unexpected ways. In ancient Mesopotamia, as different tribes expanded and encountered each other, their gods often merged, creating entirely new deities. Over time, these blended beliefs spread across the region, changing the cultural landscape. Instead of one monotheistic idea, you now had diverse, often contradictory religious practices coexisting, and sometimes even reinforcing each other. Religious conflict wasn't just about the gods themselves, but the fear that one's very identity, one's place in the world, was being destroyed. As polytheism spread, so did the fear that the old unified way of life was being lost forever, and that fear, it would become the fuel for some of the most devastating conflicts in history. In the wake of the collapse of monotheism and the rise of polytheism, a new intellectual movement began to emerge. With no clear divine truth to follow, early thinkers, philosophers, scholars, and mystics began questioning everything. What is truth? What is justice? What is the nature of the divine? Think of the early philosophers who emerged in Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia. They were attempting to understand the universe not through divine command, but through reason, logic, and observation. While they built upon earlier religious thoughts, they began to create new systems of ethics, governance, and science, ideas that would echo throughout history and eventually reshape entire civilizations. As the world moved away from a unified belief in one God, many societies saw a dramatic shift in the roles women played in religion and society. Polytheism gave rise to female deities, sometimes as powerful as their male counterparts, creating new spaces for women in spiritual and political spheres. But the flip side, it also led to the marginalization of women in some cultures, especially when these new belief systems began to enforce patriarchal structure. In ancient Egypt, for instance, deities like Isis were venerated as powerful symbols of life, fertility, and magic. Women in these early civilizations were sometimes elevated as priestesses or even rulers. Take Cleopatra, for example, who wasn't just a political leader, but also seen as a divine figure. In contrast, in other parts of the world, the rise of polytheism and the introduction of hierarchical gods meant that men were often placed at the top of the social order, sidelining women's influence. But it wasn't just the divine feminine that emerged. Early myths and religious practices started to reflect the complexities of gender roles. The goddess figures weren't just symbols of fertility and motherhood, they were also symbols of chaos, destruction, and wisdom. This evolving landscape created a new kind of power struggle, where gender dynamics and divine politics intertwined in ways that would echo throughout history. With the fragmentation of religious unity after Adam's death, the creation of sacred texts and oral traditions became crucial for preserving belief systems. These early texts didn't just serve as a spiritual guide, they were also political tools. The people who controlled the sacred narratives often controlled the very fabric of society. In ancient Mesopotamia, the creation of the epic solidified the divine right of kings, to show that the gods themselves were involved in human affairs and to dictate how society should be. Similarly, the oral traditions of many tribes passed down through generations became a way to keep a community's divine connection alive, especially when written texts were scarce. As these sacred texts were created in terms of character, they didn't just record the prophets, they shaped the future. The people who wrote and controlled these texts could dictate what was said, what was recorded, and who had power to interpret. This led to the creation of religious elites, as well as the proliferation of public schools that defined civilization. The aftermath of Adam's death didn't just cause a spiritual rupture, it sparked the first great urbanization. As people moved from nomadic tribal lifestyles to settled communities, the need for complex structures and systems grew. Cities were born, and with them came new forms of governance, religion, and social control. The Sumerians are often credited with creating one of the first major urban centers, Babylon. This was a society that began to develop laws, intricate trade systems, and complex social hierarchies. But more importantly, it was in these cities that religious practices became more institutionalized. Temples were not just places of worship. They were centers of power, commerce, and social interaction. Priests held immense influence, and their ability to control religious practices gave them political. At the same time, the rise of these early cities also meant that people began to depend more on organized systems of agriculture, trade, and governance. And where there's power, there's always struggle. These growing urban centers quickly became battlegrounds for dominance. Conflicts arose between city-states, each with its own gods, laws, and philosophies, adding yet another layer of complexity to the power struggles that defined this era. After the collapse of Adam's unified message, new schools of thought and mysticism began to emerge, often in secret. People began to look for hidden esoteric knowledge, believing that the divine could be found in hidden symbols, codes, and teaching. This wasn't just intellectual curiosity, it was an attempt to reclaim the divine order lost with Adam's death. The ancient Egyptians practiced a form of mysticism that involved the study of hidden wisdom and the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, filled with symbols, prayers, and rituals, was more than just a guide to death. It was a manual for achieving immortality and knowledge of the divine. Similarly, in ancient Greece, philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato explored ideas about the soul, the nature of reality, and the secret geometry of the universe. These secret teachings didn't just remain with the elites. Over time, they began to leak into the general populace. As different communities began to share their mystical beliefs, the lines between religion, philosophy, and magic blurred. And with this spread of hidden knowledge came a new form of power, the ability to influence and control those who didn't have access to these secrets. While the death of Adam caused a massive shift in belief systems, many societies believed that his knowledge didn't die with him. There were claims of a lost wisdom, a divine understanding of the cosmos that some leaders and spiritual figures claimed to have inherited. These myths weren't just about remembering Adam, they were about reclaiming his wisdom to justify their power. Some cultures, especially those that rose after Adam's time, believed that the knowledge Adam had possessed about agriculture, medicine, and governance was somehow passed down secretly. The ancient Sumerians, for example, recorded in their myths that the gods gave humanity the gift of writing and mathematics, tools that helped them organize their societies. But these gifts were also deeply tied to the gods' control over the world. The idea of this lost knowledge was both a blessing and a curse, as it often led to fierce competition among kings, priests, and rulers for access to the wisdom that was thought to be divine in origin. This belief in lost knowledge didn't just fade, it became a part of the fabric of many ancient civilizations. It led to the creation of secret societies, mystery schools, and hidden philosophies that survived for centuries. And the power to control or interpret this knowledge became one of the most coveted assets in human history. One of the most striking aspects of the descendants of Adam is the way their bloodlines were revered. Early tribes didn't just view their connection to Adam as a matter of ancestral pride. They saw it as a divine privilege. Over time, families began claiming that they were direct descendants of Adam's favored sons, positioning themselves as not just leaders but as holders of divine favor. This claim wasn't just symbolic, it was a powerful tool that justified their dominance and leadership over others. Throughout history, many of the great leaders and kings traced their lineage back to Adam. Some, like the prophets sent to guide humanity, were directly linked to his bloodline. From Noah to Ibrahim, the story of Adam's descendants is rich with rulers and religious figures who were believed to have inherited not just knowledge, but also spiritual authority. However, it wasn't just the prophets who claimed Adam's bloodline. Rulers and kings from various cultures also asserted their descent from him to solidify their positions. In the ancient Near East, for instance, it was common for kings to trace their genealogies back to mythical or divine ancestors. But for the descendants of Adam, this connection held an especially profound significance. Here's the most intriguing part. Many of these bloodlines still exist today. While not all descendants of Adam openly claim their lineage, there are still tribes, royal families, and individuals who trace their heritage back to these ancient beginnings. Some of them may be unaware of their origins, but the genetic markers and cultural traditions continue to point back to the earliest humans. In some cases, these families still hold significant political influence, either in the form of leadership roles or through symbolic power. In regions such as the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of South Asia, there are communities and families who claim descent from these owners. From revered religious scholars to powerful political figures, these descendants carry with them the weight of a legacy that spans millennia. The global diaspora of Adam's descendants has led to the creation of vastly different cultures and belief systems, and yet the common thread, the belief in a shared ancestor, continues to shape identities across the world. The fact that we today are still influenced by the descendants of Adam these very struggles for power, survival, and divine favor still resonate in the world today. We're still grappling with the same questions. Who controls the truth? Who holds the power? And what does it mean to be human in a world full of conflicting beliefs? Now think about this. If history is repeating itself, what's our role in this ongoing story? Are we the ones searching for truth, fighting for power, or trying to preserve something that's been lost? I want to hear your thoughts. Which of these ancient struggles, religion, power, survival, do you think still shapes the world we live in today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's get this conversation started. Because believe it or not, the next chapter of human history is being written right now. Don't just watch history, be part of it.